In this lesson, we're going to be talking about the anatomy of the heart. So, most of us probably know a heart as looking something like this, but sorry to break it to you, that's not what it actually looks like. A heart, what it actually looks like is this. Not really, but this is going to be the easiest way to explain what the different chambers of the heart are and everything. So we're just going to draw a windowsill and pretend like that's what our heart looks like. So in this windowsill, let's draw some arrows. And this is going to help us remember the names of different regions of the heart. So I have two arrows pointed up on the top side, and then two arrows pointed down on the bottom side. And the reason why I draw these arrows is because they're going to help us remember the different names of the different chambers of the heart. So these top arrows, I don't know about you, but they kind of look like an A, or at least when I draw an A, it kind of looks like an arrow if I draw a line down the middle of it. So this A, or arrow, is going to help us remember that on the top, we have our atriums. All right, so let's turn this arrow into an A as well. And then on the bottom, these arrows, they kind of look like V's. If I just draw a line down the middle of it. So the V's, those are going to tell us about that on the bottom side, we have our ventricles. And next, we have the different sides of the heart. And if you're looking at a person, your right side is their left side. And in anatomy, we always go off of the perspective of the person we're talking about. So if I draw a person here, and this is they got a big chest here, and then they got their heart in there. We're going off of their left and their right. So their right side is over here, and their left side is over here. So let's use that information to figure out, when we're talking about the heart specifically, what the left side and right sides are. So right here, this will be the right side. So we're going to label R's here. And then for the left side, I'm going to label it with an L. So right here, we've got the right atrium. Right here, we've got the left atrium. Here, we have the right ventricle. And here, we have the left ventricle. So those are the four chambers of the heart. Now let's talk about what they actually do. I didn't really draw it here, but let's draw it now. The left ventricle, it's going to be the biggest area of the heart. It has the most muscle tissue. So let's kind of draw in some of this muscle tissue that it has. It is significantly bigger than any other chamber of the heart. So it's got all this extra muscle tissue because it has a really big job to do. The left ventricle, its job is to pump blood to the entire rest of the body. And the job of the heart, one of its main functions, is to pump oxygenated blood to all of the cells in the body. And the chamber that's pumping it to all of the cells in the body is this left ventricle. So this left ventricle, what it's doing is it is sending blood, oxygenated blood, to the rest of the body. It's going to go through the aorta to do so. But really, out of this general overview, we want to get out of this that it's sending blood, oxygenated blood, to the rest of the body. So I'm going to draw oxygenated blood in red and deoxygenated blood in blue. So the body is going to use, all the cells in the body are going to use this oxygenated blood. At the cell, they're going to go through cellular respiration and use that oxygen and emit carbon dioxide as a waste product. So inside the body, or inside the cells in the body, they're going to do some kind of gas exchange, and exchange the CO2 that they no longer need, or that waste product CO2, with the oxygen that they got from this new blood that came from the heart. So let's see. So when it's going to the rest of the body, there's going to be some gas exchange. Let's kind of label that. So I'm gonna put in parentheses. When it's going to the rest of the body, it's going to all the cells in the body. And we're going to have some gas exchange, and then once the cells take that oxygen, the blood is no longer oxygenated. It is now filled with carbon dioxide. So this deoxygenated blood needs to go back to the heart. And when it goes back to the heart, it's going to go up through the vena cava and into the right atrium. The right atrium, the atriums, their only job is to pump the blood to the ventricles. So same thing with the left, it's just going to pump blood to the ventricles. That's its job. It's got to go a short distance, so they're a little bit smaller. But this left ventricle, it's the biggest part of the heart because it has to pump blood not only to your head, but also to your toes, to your fingertips. It has to reach every cell in your body. So it's got the largest distance to cover, so it's got to pump pretty hard. So the cells in the body use the oxygenated blood. There's going to be some cellular respiration here. And once the cellular respiration occurs, it uses the oxygen. It replaces those red blood cells, are now going to have carbon dioxide. Let's kind of draw that actually too. So when the red blood cells are oxygenated, they're disc shaped. They look kind of like this, and they have O2 on them. When they get used by the cells, they're going to replace that oxygen, gets replaced with CO2. So now we have CO2 on the red blood cells, and the oxygen went to the cells. So the cells now have the oxygen, the red blood cells now have the CO2. The CO2 is going to go back to the heart. The red blood cells now filled with CO2 are going to go back to the heart through the vena cava into the right atrium. And the right atrium, as we just said, its only job is to pump that blood into the ventricles. And there is a barrier here. I didn't just draw that just because. There's a barrier here, and we have a valve. And the purpose of valves is so that there's no backflow in the heart. So when blood's pumping through the heart, we don't want blood to flow backwards. That would be very, very bad. So there's these valves here, which there are a couple different names for them. I'm just going to call them, in this video, I'm going to call them atrioventricular valves, because they're valves between the atrium and the ventricles. So atrioventricular valves. And their purpose is so that blood can fill the right atrium, and then when it's ready to be pumped, it is pumped into the right ventricle. But it's not just leaking into the right ventricle. That would be bad. And it's definitely not going to flow backwards into the right atrium. That would be really bad. That kind of stuff is what causes a lot of heart problems. So the deoxygenated blood goes into the right atrium, then into the right ventricles. And then once the right ventricle is ready to pump it out of the heart, it's going to come up through the pulmonary arteries. It's going to go through pulmonary arteries and into the lungs. So let's draw that way up here. We'll do the lungs in orange, because everybody knows lungs are orange. Not really. All right, so they're going to go into the lungs, and the job of the lungs is to give us oxygen. And so these red blood cells, they're filled with carbon dioxide right now. But when we get to the lungs and we breathe out, we're breathing out that carbon dioxide that was on the red blood cells. the red blood cells are going to release the carbon dioxide into our lungs. And then when we breathe out, we're releasing the carbon dioxide into the air. When we breathe back in, we are breathing in oxygen, and that oxygen is going to attach to the red blood cells. So let's draw those red blood cells again. So when they come into the lungs, they are filled with CO2. They have CO2 on them. But when they exit the lungs, they're going to exit the lungs and go into the left atrium. But when they exit the lungs, they're going to be red blood cells with O2 attached to them. So again, when we breathe out, we're breathing out this carbon dioxide, we're kicking it out of the body. And then when we breathe in, we're breathing in oxygen, and that's going to get attached to those red blood cells. Those red blood cells are now going to, when our heart beats, that we're going to pump these oxygenated red blood cells back into the heart, and they're going to enter through the atriums. Blood is always entering the heart through atriums. In this case, when it comes from the lungs, it's going through the pulmonary veins and into the left atrium. Let's go ahead and label some of those. So for the right ventricle, this line right here to the lungs, that is the pulmonary artery. Pulmonary artery. And then when the blood is coming back from the lungs to the heart, it is going through the pulmonary vein. Pulmonary, if you're curious why it shows up both, pulmonary means lungs or something along those lines. So pulmonary means it has to do with the lungs. So the pulmonary artery goes to the lungs, pulmonary veins comes from the lungs back to the heart. And so we're going to enter the blood's going to enter through the left atrium, and at this point it is now oxygenated. So this oxygenated blood, it's not just going to hang out in the left atrium. It's going to travel through the atrioventricular valves, this time the left atrioventricular valves. And when it does so, those valves are going to, when the left atrium fills up, those valves are going to open and allow the blood to flow through. When the blood flows through, they're going to close so that the blood does not flow backwards. That would be very, very bad. And then when the left ventricle fills up, it is going to allow the blood to flow to the rest of the body, to all the cells in the body, so that we can oxygenate all of the cells, and all the cells can live. They need oxygen to survive. All of the cells in our body need oxygen to survive. So, some other things that I want to point out here. When do we know that something's an artery, and when do we know that something's a vein? Let's describe that down here. I'm going to move some stuff around a little bit. Okay, so let's describe that down here. Arteries, and we're always going to remember this, and this is one of the really key points of this lesson, because I've tutored a lot of classes, I've taken a lot of classes, and I have never ever seen an anatomy test or physiology test that doesn't have this as a question. So it's always on every test, expected to be on your test. Arteries are going to send blood away from the heart. Let's do lowercase. Arteries are going to send blood away from the heart. And then veins send blood back to the heart. And you might say, well, wait a second, are arteries, are they going to be oxygenated or deoxygenated? That's a good question, and that's where teachers try to trick you on their exams. Usually, most arteries are oxygenated because even though I only drew one arrow here, there's so many different arrows that are branching off of this. We have so many arteries going to all the rest of our body. There's arteries breaking off into other arteries, and we have so many arteries. All of the arteries in our body carry oxygenated blood except for one, or like a small set of arteries called these pulmonary arteries. The only arteries that are deoxygenated blood are the ones that carry deoxygenated blood back to the lungs, because we need blood to flow out of the heart and to the lungs in order to get the oxygen. But that's the only time that we're going to flow blood out of the heart that's deoxygenated, away from the heart that's deoxygenated. Every other time that we're flowing blood away from the heart, it's because it's oxygenated and it's traveling to the cells in the body so the cells can get oxygen. So that's always a trick question on every single anatomy or physiology exam that involves the heart that I've ever seen. So teachers usually ask and say, what is true about arteries? Do they send blood? What is always true? Do they send blood away from the heart, or are they always oxygenated, or is it always deoxygenated, or does it go to the heart? And the answer is they always send blood away from the heart. Away, arteries away. But they're usually oxygenated, but not always. Veins always send blood back to the heart. All right, so a couple more things that I want to point out here. First of all, I'm going to label a couple of things so that we don't forget, because these are important. So let's zoom in. We're going to remember that RA, that stands for the right atrium. LA stands for left atrium. All right, LV stands for left ventricle. And RV stands for right ventricle. All right, and atriums, again, remember, atriums accept blood, ventricles push blood away. All right, I need to fix my drawings. I just deleted all my arrows. All right, got them redrawn in here now. And then lastly, we need to finish labeling. So remember that these valves here are called the atrioventricular valves. We have the right one and the left one. There are other names for them. This one, the right one, is also called the tricuspid valve, and the left one is also called the bicuspid valve or the mitral valve. And those are some other names that you're going to have to remember, and because they're all kind of used interchangeably. I like to use atrioventricular valve because it's the easiest to remember. It's between the atrium and ventricle. So make sure to know all of the names, but right now I'm just going to write down atrioventricular valve. All right, we also have valves when the blood leaves the heart through the left ventricle or through the right ventricle. And those you can look through an actual heart diagram. I don't want to cover every single detail here. But let's see. Again, at the lungs, that's where gas exchange is going to occur. So let's label that because we're swapping out the CO2 blood, getting rid of that, it's getting rid of the CO2 and taking in the oxygen. So we'll remember that the lungs is where gas exchange occurs. And then one more thing that I want to write down is kind of like the complete map of what's going on. Let's write it out instead of drawing it out as much. So we'll start with the heart. And from the heart, specifically out of the left ventricle, we're going to go to the cells in the body. And we're going to do so through arteries. Whenever blood leaves the heart, it's going to go through arteries. And that's when it leaves any ventricle, not just the left ventricle, left or right ventricle, it's going to go through arteries. And then when it goes through arteries, those arteries become smaller and smaller and smaller until they reach every single cell in the body. And when they become really small, we actually call those arterioles. Arterioles. And then those are going to lead to venules. So the cells are going to use, the cells are going to use the blood, use the oxygen in the blood, and there's going to be more gas exchange occurring here. And the blood gets used, and then the oxygen gets swapped out with the CO2. So the cells are going to give off the CO2 the waste product that they have, and take in the oxygen. So now that the blood is going to become deoxygenated, and it's going to start flowing back to the heart. And the first thing that is going to start flowing back through are called venules. Venules. I think that's how it's spelled. All right, then after they travel through the venules, they're going to go to the bigger veins. The veins start getting bigger and bigger and bigger as we get back to the heart. So they're going to go through veins. And then eventually they'll go through the veins and all the way back to the heart. They're going to circle back to the heart. And that's deoxygenated blood, typically. So we can draw it like that. And then, as we just said, here between the arterioles and the venules, that's where gas exchange is occurring. That's where gas exchange is occurring, and cellular respiration. So here we've got cellular respiration, which, in other words, we have gas exchange occurring. So those oxygen molecules, the O2 molecules leave the red blood cells, and the CO2 molecules hop onto the red blood cells to travel back to the heart and then to the lungs to be replaced with oxygen again. And then, just if I didn't make it clear enough, here, arterioles and venules, at this spot right here, this is where we're at cells. This is where the blood is given to the cells, for the cells to use the oxygen. All right, that's about all I got for an overview of the heart. I've kind of always found it helpful to, instead of always looking at the exact anatomical structure of the heart and trying to just strictly memorize things, having it drawn out in a kind of animated, color-coded, maybe less anatomically correct manner like this has always helped me kind of understand what's going on a little bit more. So hopefully this is helpful for you. But I'd say after you kind of get a good sense of this, your next step is going to go to look at the actual anatomical structure of the heart and make sure you can attribute what you learned here to what's actually going on with an actual structure of the heart. And then also you can start learning about the more intricate details of the heart. That'll be covered there.